This week on Rockstar Superhero.
Pass the pitchforks. Get the guns. Pass the pitchforks. Get the guns.
My conversation with Nick Hannon from UK Legends Sons of Alpha Centauri is a reminder that good things take time. Nick and his songwriting partner of 20 years, Marlon King, have mastered the slow burn of artistic integrity. Their latest album isn't only a gold rush of melody and charm, but a collaboration with some surprising turns. I'm not going to give any of it away here, so you'll have to listen to the show. After you check out our conversation, make sure you head over to your favorite web browser, load up the Sons of Alpha Centauri Bandcamp page, and get their new album Push. Or buy some merch, because that's what good little soldiers do. Until then, enjoy this thoughtful interview with an eloquent musical samurai. This is Nick Hannon on the Rockstar Superhero Podcast. What I like about you is you've taken things slowly. You've quietly evolved as an artist and as a band. And I'm wondering if there's a part of you that distances yourself so nobody influences the direction you're taking your music.
It's a good question. I think that we've certainly taken a road which is harder, but then the rewards are so much greater for us. I think, like, when I was first exposed to the internet, it was kind of a knowledge tool and a comms tool, which was great in, I don't know, when probably the early 2000s, really. Mm-hmm. And then when it started becoming more of a promotions tool, the web 2.0 and stuff, I was like, this doesn't feel linked in with the kind of vibe that I had associated with alternative rock and, you know, the all the cool things that happened in the 90s and stuff. Some of the integrity felt like it was falling away from, you know, the quiet sort of humbleness of people handing out flyers against, you know, getting zines through the door or signing up for mailing lists or postcards through the door, and all of that kind of stuff really felt like there was a true engagement, whereas everything through the internet, everything felt like it was too much investment. And that, I think, is why we've tried to take things slower, because that organic growth is a lot slower to generate than what would be traditional, or now would be seen as more traditional methods online.
Yeah. I love that, though, because I mean, I'm a few years older than you, actually a number of years older than you. And when I was in high school, I actually went to high school with Toby Vale, who is the drummer for Bikini Kill.
Oh, right on. Cool.
Yeah. And so when you talk about the zines, you know, you talk about that ground, that what's the word? That, you know, that team sort of aspect of going out, the whole grassroots movement of spreading the wealth about a type of music or a scene is something that, for the most part, is long gone. Because if you're not, you know, immediate, if you're not Twitter friendly, if you're not Instagram focused, all these little things that, you know, create influence with quotes around it, it's easy to be left behind, and it's immensely frustrating when you have something to say. Yeah.
It's one of those. We found it again. I missed out on the tape trading thing. That was kind of a late 80s vibe, and by the time I got into it, you know, it was kind of like the early to mid 90s, really, and things have moved into CDs. Yeah. But the whole first going to gigs and there being a scene and there being different bands, even if it was just a local scene, let alone the big, you know, established scenes, you know, New York hardcore or Washington post hardcore, or all the things that are happening on your side with Seattle or Palm Desert, and you can mention, you know, so many different ones.
Yeah.
And the things that were happening over here, I could relate to it, I could associate with it. And when I saw the bands, I was like, oh, that guy or that person or that lady, she's in these other bands, and it was all sort of interconnected and organic. And then you'd order in the records, and I just felt like there was a whole more. It was kind of like going to the library to look at all the different books. Whereas now, yeah, you could get every single book out there, but who knows what one to read and how it relates to another one, really. I mean, it's just that whole being able to relate to the music, to the people, to how and when, and that context of it all happening. And I kind of lost that context and perspective when the promotional aspect of the internet sort of erupted. So yeah, as you say, stepped back, stepped away, and just rethought what was relevant to us as a band, which was challenging because people are like, what are you doing? You're taking
where did you go?
Difficult road.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but it's interesting you brought up Palm Desert, because one of the things that I thought might have influenced you is pre Queens of the Stone Age, Kyuss. And was that a band, or was that scene sort of indirectly involved with your musical growth? Yeah,
for sure. I mean, if I just move my head, that's a Kyuss poster on the wall.
Oh my God, so there it is. Yeah. Yeah. For the listeners, he's got a rad room with a freaking palm leaf and everything, or it's a marijuana plant. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, so they were a band that was kind of like a catalyst band, which you'd be able to get over here in the shops. You'd be able to get hold of Sky Valley or Blues to the Red Sun. Oh. And they were kind of a band that people would get into, and they'd bring them into college. And again, it was great because everyone would get into the same record at the same time, which doesn't really quite happen so much now. Sure, a record will be released on Spotify and everyone will check it out. But, what we had was a couple of people would buy a record when it was released. And then everyone else would borrow that record, and then they'd copy that record. And then everyone was listening to that record at the same time. So there was a kind of like communal, aesthetic that kind of went with it. Like you'd go to parties, you'd hang out with people, and everyone would have that as their record that they were checking out. And that was kind of cool because it helped to, sort of freeze in time sort of the way that you could relate to the music as well. And I can't tell if I think this is probably just me just getting old and, having to deal with the way the world changes around us.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
But I related to that a lot more than just being a release radar with here's another record, and not everyone's listening to the same thing at the same time, which, is probably in a way is a good thing, but in a way it doesn't really help captivate that. I remember when we were all listening to this and everything that was going on, and it really sort of did that. And then, of course, from those bands, you then go in and find other bands. So the members of Kyuss were in bands like Yawning Man, and they were in, all of these different projects that was associated before Kyuss. So you could really dig deep into that. And there was a lot of history and a lot of, interest. And some of those records just became really hard to find.
Yeah.
And someone would get it and you'd be like, whoa, no way. And then they'd bring it and you copy it and everyone would listen to it. And it was great.
Yeah. I love the fact, too, that they were so influential as a band when they were 14, 15, 16 years old. They were so deep from the very beginning. And I have a feeling if I were to sit and interview, Queens now, it would probably reference bands like Cactus from the 70s, these sort of earlier, the earlier, heavier, sludgier bands, the Vanilla Fudges, if you will. And I love that stuff. I love how this interview started, because I rarely get to talk to anybody about these deeper contextual things, right? It's not just the aspect of how we're formed, where we grew up. I believe you grew up in Faversham, something like that.
Yeah, just out the next town down, so Sittingbourne. But we were born on the island, which is an island just off of Kent.
Really?
So it's a small island just off the south coast, really. In the way into London, there's an island, which is sort of an island off an island, which I guess is almost a bit like the desert team as well, who are sort of quite withdrawn. And as you were saying, it all comes into that sort of withdrawn and isolation aspect, which is cool.
Yeah,
but as you were saying, yeah.
Well, I mean, I apologize too, because I almost interrupted my own thought, but I agree that I think that separation forces, it's like the COVID situation now. We're being forced to communicate in new ways. We're being forced to collaborate. I mean, we're really being forced, in a sense, to deal with this separation. And of course, it's created a lot of anxiety. But in the same token, it's created this immense, this uprising of new material. All of a sudden, everybody can't wait to, vomit out their latest releases. And I can't keep up. You know what I mean? It's an amazing experience right now. And I'm wondering, with COVID for you, has this album been in the hopper for a while?
Yeah, it has. There's been, and there is, I guess, a kind of an idea about how it's all meant to connect together, but it's quite a loose idea, because if it becomes too fixated, you lose flexibility, and the flexibility we've found is really, really important. A lot of people aren't always necessarily around, and when they are around, I mean, pre-COVID, a lot of people were on tour, or they couldn't get in the studio or whatever. But with COVID, it has enabled people to probably communicate in different ways, through, all these various different sort of forums. But equally, as you were saying, linked to that, there's still this huge promotional element that often comes and is trying to distill that, or as we're trying to do, is we've never really tried to see it as content. And there's a lot of people that are sort of pushing content and having there to be regular content all of the time. And that's kind of what it's geared towards now. And we've tried to step away from that and sort of make sure that the comms are still there. So communicating properly, engaging, like with yourself, and having a proper conversation. And then equally with the music, that is something that is in by itself something that has a story and an aura around it, but we're not. And I don't think that we can bring ourselves to just push it and push it and push it as content. And kind of that's one of the contexts of the actual track. The idea is people just pushing and pushing and pushing stuff onto you, and how that can sort of blind you and suffocate you. Because people I don't necessarily appreciate just how much it happens. And yeah, it's something that we've had rolling. Some of the tracks on there, one of the tracks we were playing in 2010, and we worked it through. And then a couple of the tracks we sort of worked up, 2 or 3 tracks that were going to go on the second record onto Continuum. But when we started bringing them together, we started to feel actually there's something. This isn't quite fitting with the Continuum vibe, which is a lot more sort of spacey, progressive, expansive. It was more direct, it was more channeled. And me and Marlon were in a band, our first band, which was like an alt metal band, I guess. And our singer at the time, Woody, he channeled a lot of the sort of Chino Marino, Jonah Matranga kind of vibes, because it was like 97, 98, and that was the thing.
Yeah.
So we knew when that started coming together, that vibe started coming together, we were like, okay, so we've written in this kind of style before. What would it mean if we were to actually start harnessing this approach and really take it the whole distance, which is what we started doing probably about the same time as we were finishing off Continuum. These songs started to come together, and we sent the first 3 tracks off, which have got Steve on drums, to Jonah, and he heard them, and he came into the studio. And it went, it was an immense but intense situation to have.
Yeah.
And then after that, it evolved into being a full record and becoming the third SOAC album, which we're immensely proud of. But we didn't initially think it was going to go off in that direction. You sometimes just sort of go, okay, so this is happening. Let's roll with it.
Oh, that's great. When it comes to songwriting duties, do you spread the wealth? Is it you and Marlon? One of the things I've always thought about is when it comes to songs, whose song is it? And I mean this sort of out there, right? Not just that simple question, but is it yours or the band's? In a sense, do you own it yourself? And I mean this figuratively, not literally. Do you own that material? Are you precious about it, or is it a collective's material?
it is the process is myself and Marlon, I think, in terms of the music, and that has stemmed from me being a bass player, since I was young, really, and being able to write hooks and grooves and what influenced me. But Marlon being more of an orchestrator, so he can get something and he can transform it into something, because he's classically trained. So he learnt music. He can write, he can read music. He's gone through the school of music, and he can play piano and guitar. So his orchestration skills, in terms of taking something that would be a very sort of basic A-B idea into something that's a song, is a very sort of iterative process. So he and I worked together on that. And when we formed the band, it was he and I, and we did it for 3 years, and we just wrote 35 songs together to get an idea of what the sort of initial rangefinder was for that. So I don't think of it as my music or his music. I think, we are collectively sort of SOAC, and that is, we sort of pin that to the mantle, really, of the band.
Yeah, no, that's really wise, and it does make a lot of sense. I mean, for me, coming from the music business as well, I've always looked at it as, I can't remember the woman's name, but Martin Scorsese, the director, his chief counterpart is his editor. And when that material comes in and they put a film together, they bring in the written words, then they go out and direct the film, right? They actually film the movie. And then, of course, they create the movie in the editing room. And it seems like you and Marlon have that same relationship. You might bring in these primary song ideas, like you said, this A-B, but then Marlon really effectively is your staff arranger, who comes in and offers feedback and says, no, it actually works like this, because you can see how the bookend happens, right? Yeah.
I'd say that 90% of the material is like that. Occasionally, Marlon will just write a song completely and say, this is what I think, and then occasionally myself, but 95% of the time that's it. And it's really good, because it's you're writing and that there's going to be an element of change, so not approaching it to say this is it and I'm highly resistant to any form of change, and that would be the worst thing for us. It's that, to feel that immersion in knowing that there's going to be some change and some orchestration and some editing and some enhancement, really. And with Jonah, when he came into the studio to lay down vocals on the first sort of 3 tracks, that there was another gate that we had to pass through with that, because he was like, well, this needs to work for me, and I'm going to bring what I need to bring in order for it to work in this play. And previously, working with people like Yawning Man, Gary and Will from Karma to Burn, they're guitarists, so it's about decorating and building the music. But when it was working for the first time, and they're both established instrumental acts, when it was working with someone who's an established vocalist and performer, it was again, actually, we're gonna have to rein it back here and create space, and almost unlearn what we've learned a little bit to make space for those harmonies and melodies, which were crucial.
Yeah. To you and Marlon, then, I mean, so I don't want to misspeak. Is really SOAC you and Marlon, and everybody else is sort of here and available in some sort of collaboration? Because I noticed that, you have different musicians weaving in and out of different tracks. And as you mentioned a moment ago with Jonah singing on the first 3, is it really just you and Marlon? I guess that's the part I've never been able to figure out.
I think when it was myself and Marlon, and then Steve and Blake joined, and Steve has been an integral part of what we've done for 10 to 15 years as a drummer. Very much been the backbone to bounce ideas off, to jam with. He was there for everything, Yawning Sons, everything with Karma, all the shows, obviously. And 15 years, has been a long time. And I would say he was an integral part Blake would phase in and phase out, and that kind of worked for him, psychologically as well as creatively. But for Steve, he was important and critical, really, because it's good drummer, good band, great drummer, great band, and myself and Marlon became very, very cautious of making sure that we got the best person that we knew locally, which was Stevie B. And so, but he's Steve, he's considerably, he's a few years older than we are, and he's kind of looked ahead and probably at some of the ideas that were being put forward, and it's not quite aligned, I don't think, with where he wants to go. And when we did this record, for example, he played the first 3 tracks, but then he was in, when myself and Marlon were like 16, we were going to go see him playing hardcore bands in the late 90s.
Incredible.
He was there, he was doing it, he was in these local bands, he was in these really heavy, really full-on bands, and we loved it, and it was brilliant to bring him in. So when it kind of started to feel like he was coming full circle on his own journey, I think he felt like it made sense for Mitch to come in and do that. And as well as that, the record started to create an identity around that scene and that idea of the Sacramento metal alternative rock scene. Yeah. And to bring the UK and that together was, for him to step back and let someone come in and do that was very generous, and highly appreciate that.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, it's Mitch Wheeler and Jonah Matranga, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, Will Haven, right? Isn't that where with Mitch? Yeah, so I mean, it makes a lot of sense that you would want that. I mean, if you're going in that direction, if you can just see the natural evolution of the feel, makes a lot of sense. Are Jonah then? I mean, I should say, is Jonah or is Mitch considered to be sort of momentary members, or are they just strictly coming in to act as session musicians on the album?
I think it's fair to say they're sort of momentary, and they, we're thinking about what our next steps are going to be. Mm-hmm. And again, it's kind of linked out to this new world of what does that look like? What does people's availability look like? Yeah, because moving forward, it's got potential, but equally, there's that whole distance and
5,000
wanting
miles
to play live and stuff. So it's again, there's a lot of moving parts, but because the relationships are strong, and because we try and foster strong relationships, working relationships with people and creative relationships with people, like with some records, there's been a large number of years between, say, the first collaboration we did with Karma to Burn and then the next sequence of releases we did with them was over a period of, say, 10 years. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that it is about a case of, although it's more of a collective, I guess, and, they'll come in, there'll be a swarm, a creative swarm, something will come out of it. And we think, well, is this something we can do again, or will we move on, myself and Marlon, and think what the next sort of swarm, a creative swarm might be. But we still maintain and respect those relationships and make sure that everyone's still got oversight of what's going on, because that's important.
Yeah. This isn't a question, but I do have to say that opening track, Get the Guns. I just started laughing when I heard it because it's so chunky and heavy, and oh my God, it just hit me in the face, and the groove is so perfect, and it makes sense. I mean, especially when you're talking about these other collaborators on it, but I will say this, and this is not to, I want to be cautious with my words here because I don't want it to come off as sounding as though I'm some weird critic or judge. I love that you've added these gentlemen in for this collaboration, because they've given you almost a second identity, if that makes sense. At least going back to, the earlier material, I mean, there's a clear evolution, obviously. I mean, it happens. It's impossible not to evolve. But I listen to this and I just think, I mean, you guys have become like the Steely Dan of post-rock, if there was such a thing, because you've done a little bit of everything, and you have this considerable time between album releases. It's like post-rock, post-metal, if there's such a term, and even ambient. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So here's a question then. So why do you think Sons of Alpha Centauri is so hard to categorize?
I, I would guess it's because we've, in terms of doing the instrumental stuff, we've tried to, as opposed to doing the cycle which a lot of bands would do, understandably, and I've done it myself, which is write songs, put them on an album, tour, write more songs, tour. We've tried to learn as much as we can and say, these people are more than our contemporaries. These are people that I grew up listening to. And the internet has enabled us to be able to speak with these people, engage with them. And if it works, then it works. So we learned so much from working with Karma and Gary and all of these various people. And it wasn't just them. There have been others as well.
Yeah.
That we've managed to expand our repertoire, and we love it all. And the idea is really to write music that we would love, and that if we love it, then we're proud of it. Rather, we'd never want to write for anyone else. And I know that sounds strange saying that, but I'm sure there's an ideology out there that does adhere to that.
Yeah.
So we because of that, we'll sort of pursue something to its fullest, and so we will pursue a record, a collaboration like Yawning Sons with the Yawning Man guys. We'll get the vocals done, then we'll do a single, then we'll try and perform it, and then that creates a whole nother ambient layer to it. Then we'll pursue that, and it's just trying to sort of not keep plates spinning, but just to try and keep different vibes alive whilst trying to maintain this sort of core identity, which is challenging. And with this one, we thought this was the first step where it was kind of, we don't want to, but we may well do end up ostracizing people that were into the debut, which was very much at its time, in its sort of, I don't know, we were probably with, playing with Pelican and all of that kind of stuff,
right.
that world was a little bit different. Selden, we did a big collaboration artistically with Selden Hunt. We did all of the logos, all of the artwork, all the posters, the T-shirts. It was all done by him, and that created an aesthetic. But we can't just solely sit there. And a lot of what the music that we're into has informed us that evolution, whilst keeping that sort of core identity, is needed. Otherwise, you just end up doing the same thing again and again.
Yeah.
And I think that after 20 years of doing that, we probably wouldn't be standing here looking at all of the extras, all of the stuff that's to come, which is going to be really exciting. And I really think that it sounds strange, but after 20 years, I think the band is really going to sort of the pace and the propensity will actually continue to build.
Yeah. I love that you've been together so long and that you've been very considerate about yourself and been very faithful to the fan base. But kind of tagging off of what I asked a moment ago, do you sort of, as an artist, do you find this sort of odd pleasure in getting your audience or new listeners to struggle to make sense of what you're trying to achieve?
No, I wouldn't say it was. It was certainly not anything that we're deliberately trying to make it difficult. It's not a deliberate thing. I would say that we're trying to expand the concept of the album. So if someone's saying you should just do singles, then we'll say no, we want to just do albums, but we want to do another album linked to the same album. So we don't consider Buried Memories like a studio album. We consider it like an extension of Continuum. But when we presented that to that idea and brought it all together with Justin Broderick, the whole industrial side of it all, it was like, well, that works because it sort of works as an artistic piece. And the themes and the content was sort of linked in with Continuum, and even to a point, the first album, there's a couple of sort of extensions of the first album. So it's just trying to keep that sort of golden thread almost sort of alive. But we're not sort of deliberately trying to ostracize people or make it difficult for them. I mean, that would be a bit self-sabotage because we are making it harder for ourselves anyway.
There are a lot of musicians out there like that. I mean, one that I actually quite admire is Jürgen Munkeby, from the Norwegian band Shining, because he's gone from hardcore jazz to jazz metal to, sort of extreme pop. I mean, and he's absolutely alienated the fan base as he's gone along. And yet it does seem to me that there's this sort of artistic bent that can't wait to thumb its nose and sort of self-sabotage. And I don't get that from you at all. So I'm not laying that on your feet, but I was curious. If I may, there was another influence that I have heard in your material, and it's probably not there at all. And it could be strictly that Jonah reminds me. But were you listening to Stabbing Westward in the 90s, in the mid 90s? Are you familiar with that band? Okay,
familiar with Stabbing Westward, absolutely.
Yeah. Not obviously you're not sort of this heavy industrial band like they were, but Christopher Hall's voice might have influenced Jonah, actually, because there's that sort of there's the timbre in his voice, and it really took me there. And based on all the other influence you mentioned, I wondered, because those were one of those bands that should have been bigger than they were. I just think they were so vitriolic. They were so actually angry. They were literally an angry band that I think people didn't know what to do with them, and they probably just self-destructed.
Well, that is an awesome story in itself. I mean, Stabbing Westward. There are so many cases of bands where they should have done more than you think that they would have done. I mean, I always found Lungfish, who are like a band on Discord. I was like, why were they not so much more revered than I always thought they should have been? They were, and there's just always like examples of that, isn't there? Where you just think, you get into that band and you're kind of like, why is this not quite where it should be? And that was the great thing about, alternative rock and metal and everything in the night. There was so much coming through, whether it be Touch and Go or Amphet or, Sub Pop or Man's Ruin. You'd be like, wow, it's really hard to digest. And I guess in a way it's quite nice now that all of that material is available. But it's the fact that, if you walk into, a bar and you've got access to everything you could ever drink, in a way you just be like, oh, I'll just have what I'm familiar with, please. I'll just have a pint of lager, because it's just too much. You've got to sort of like be slowly exposed to it. And that's like exposure sort of takes you down crazy avenues of music. And when you speak to people about music as well, and you go to their house, hopefully, you see they've got a collection of something. I always used to really be able to relate to that. I'd like to think, if I sort of came to your house, I'd be like, oh yeah, cool, there's some Stabbing Westward records, or, there's some Lungfish records, and I could speak to you about it. I always sort of get worried that I'll start going to people's houses and they'll just have like a square box, in the corner of the room. And I'll be like, what are you into? They'll be like, oh, it's just all on a square box in the middle of the room now. Yeah. There's something I can't quite relate to. And don't get me wrong, like I suppose there are sort of benefits of it, environmentally, and not about not producing loads of stuff all the time. But equally, there's a way that you can relate to stuff and how you look after it. And, I'd like to think that I could pass my records on to people and stuff like that, and that people would, still be into it. So it's a balance, isn't it? But yeah.
It is. What's interesting too is that, compact discs were such a big shift. They were important and radical, and at the same time they were clinical, and they took so much of the traditional warmth and feel out of music, right? People would brag on, if you remember looking on the back of the CD, it would say DDD, because it meant it was digitally recorded, digitally mastered, digitally mixed.
Yeah.
And there was this sort of like, puffery about it, about look at me go. And I'm thinking, but we've lost the things, we've lost the natural curve of the audio wave. It's turned into squares, and even though it's not really discernible, when you look at today's material, even though the majority of it has been released in singles, nowadays everybody's really hot on the actual LP thing again. Going back to vinyl, and I just wonder why we've gone back. I mean, I think it's wonderful, but to me it doesn't make sense as evolution goes, because it's actually, I mean, sure, it's a step forward sonically. They just didn't want to admit it, but it is a step backward technologically, if that makes sense. That's not really a question, but I'm curious, what's your thoughts on the vinyl sort of resurgence?
I think it's fantastic. It's the one thing that I think coming into the 2010s, we noticed an upsurge on it. And that was why we really, really pushed it quite hard, as opposed to we did the first record and it was still mid 2000s. CDs was still like the primary format. The internet was pushing through. And then like we still did more CDs with Karma and Yawning Sons and stuff. But then when I started to see this upsurgence in vinyl, and I had CDs wall to walls, still buy CDs.
That's awesome.
But everyone's selling their CDs, so you can get them like really cheap now.
Yeah,
so
50 cents.
Yeah, exactly. You can go and buy a discography, and but when I saw that, I was speaking to the Karma guys, and I was like, we should do something that's really pushing the vinyl format, and that was when we started to do the vinyl series. Right. We started with 7 inches, and then from there, when it came to doing Continuum, we were doing the vinyl, and the same with Push. But on both of those records, we've actually got CDs included in the vinyl.
That's
and
cool.
We've got the digital download. So it's just trying to. I really do want to keep the physical format alive in terms of just being able to. If someone wants to buy it, if they want to listen to it in their car. I mean, cars are now they don't have CD players, but there's still loads of cars that have CD players.
Yep.
To make sure that people can access it in a format that works for them. And after we released Continuum and Buried Memories, we released it as a 2 CD digipack. The fold out ones, because like Roadrunner used to do in the late 90s. They were awesome. These fold out digipacks and all of the inlays, and so we love all of that. So we again, it becomes quite intensive, like doing all of these like quite aesthetically intense releases.
Yeah.
So like Push has got like UV. The actual writing on it is in a UV, lifted font. The first album had like foil injected, and it was all stamped in Braille. But that was it. It was all part of that whole aesthetic, really. The vinyl is a huge part of that. And so that has just been a massive dimension to do, because you can put the downloads and the CDs in there. So it's basically you buy one thing and you get everything, and you can decorate it all. We've even started putting in, like, some of our limited releases, a 3-inch CD into them, which is like remixes and outtakes, and they're quite hard to get hold of, but it's really good for us because we know it's just another format where it's just kind of like you can't even put those into a computer. You have to have a dedicated CD player with the that can take a 3-inch CD. It's not self-sabotage. It's just saying, the people that love it this is for people that love the physical approach, and this is for you. And that's cool.
Yeah. Well, it actually harkens back to what you said a moment ago about having a wall of CDs is there's the collectibility factor, because now all of a sudden CDs, and granted, even the way that vinyl feels, even with its resurgence, you still feel like you're buying something that's a collectible, especially when you're dealing with the fact that these albums are now being pressed on these crazy, wildly colored vinyls, right?
Yeah.
All the they look like a Jackson Pollock painting nowadays. I wanted to talk a bit about Push. I mean, I know we've been edging in here and there on it, but the album came out a few weeks back in August, correct? How has it been received? I mean, obviously you've gotten out. I'm sure you've done a number of podcasts and interviews, and critics have responded. Promo companies are talking about it. But what have you been hearing? What are your fans telling about the songs?
We've from a sort of a front end, working with the people that are in the industry. They've had an immense amount of interest in printed and online media, which has been great, which has been quite a bit more exposure than we would normally get, which has been nice, I think, because it's nice to have that interest from the printed media, which is, like gold dust really to try and get into. And then the feedback that we've been getting from people that have known us a long time was, it's a bit of a shock, but then when they hear it, they're like, it still feels like an SOAC record. It still feels like an SOAC record, but it's all part of this evolution that they can perceive now. So obviously the questions that we've been getting back now is, what are you going to do now? So there's that natural sort of gravitation towards people who have now got sort of 3 records they can plot, a load of collaborations in between, and they're sort of trying to, guess what it's going to do next.
Yeah. Well, you stole my question. That was one of my pathetic, unplanned questions. But you know what you could do, Nick, is you could actually re-record the very first song on your first album and have that be the closer on your last album.
Oh, I like that. That's a good idea, because the tracks are all the numbers.
Yeah.
Because we still put the numbers in there so that they can be tracked chronologically, so people can see when they were written and stuff. We really like we still keep the idea of the numbers alive, and even more so, just out of respect for our good friends in Karma, who were the first band to do it. And it's for us to go back to those tracks and to maybe do another version or something like that would be fantastic. That's a great idea. I really like that.
Well, you're welcome. You can brilliant.
Have it. Okay, well, we'll send it to you on vinyl.
Yeah, and do it really lo-fi, and then don't resolve it. In fact, make the first note on the original album be the note that it resolves to. Right? So you can literally listen to it cyclically forever.
Or equally, maybe start doing the records and having the tracks fade out and just make one long record so they all have to connect together.
Exactly. Okay,
so YouTube as an 11-hour track.
Yes.
The whole discography.
Somebody's going to think it's the greatest thing in the world, and then maybe you'll get a whole bunch of Facebook shares and be like, "Look, here's everything they've ever done, man."
Yeah.
I'm sure I know the answer to this, and it's probably out there, but I didn't see it in my research. Why does the band perform so few shows? Is it just lack of availability with the various musicians you've worked with over the years, or is it just like that's just really not our thing? We'd rather get our art out there for the sake of the art.
We are not averse to playing live. Definitely not. It's. I think you're right in saying it's some of the logistics. So when we were playing locally a lot, when we were sort of, Steve had first joined and we were trying to get everything lined up for the first record recording, we did play quite a lot of local shows. And then we moved, in the late sort of 2000s, we moved into doing a lot in London. And we were almost resident band at one point at the Camden Underworld, which is, awesome venue. It's kind of like, or would have been like, CBGB's in New York, just fantastic. And, we did a record that was we did a show there, and there was a record that was specifically only available. It's the Camden Underworld edition. We were doing loads of shows in London. We were playing with loads of bands and that are friends of ours and other bands. And we were playing lots. And then I think after sort of 2012, 2013, it started to become a little bit harder as myself and Marlon entered our 30s, and Steve entered another decade of his life, and it was kind of like and it was like, all right, okay, so these are the challenges that get posed, which is why bands sometimes just implode or whatever. And we were like, in order to continue to make this work, we needed to probably reel this back in, to put more time into this, like in order to make Continuum happen and all this work we want to do with Justin and stuff. So we focused on that, and then we tried to sort of resuscitate the live thing, which we did to a point, probably around about 2018. We did a few shows, and then 2019 happened when we started bringing Push together, and then we know what happened after that. So I think that has extended what would otherwise have just been a sort of a live hiatus into something a bit more. But the band will definitely, perform live again, and as much as it can do. And the band receives a few offers to play live as well, both in the UK and in Europe. And there's been a lot of people that have offered to do things internationally beyond that as well. But it's just trying to make it tie up, so it's just not like one show there or one show there. We've got to start connecting the dots. And in order to do that, we either need to sort of work with another band, which is not always forthcoming when things are as they are at the moment. Everything's been delayed, And equally, we worked a lot with Karma to Burn. We worked a huge amount with that band, and so losing Will has kind of impacted on where we would normally go in terms of live performances. They'd normally take us on the road, we'd play shows with them, or there'll be people that would be booking them that would know us. So we're trying to sort of find our way a little bit on that. So we're sort of going into a bit of a, into think about how to do that moving forward. But we will definitely do it, and it's not through any other reason besides that, really. I don't think we will perform lots. It's quite nice to make sure that the performances are intimate and that they're unique and that they are one-offs. But equally, it's not a case of that's not a thing. Like that,
Right.
That isn't where we are. We are sort of in this transitionary state at the moment, I think, as well with Mitch and Jonah. So it'll be interesting to see where those guys' heads are at as well.
Yeah. Oh man, I would love to see something like that get together.
Yeah.
Even if it was a small festival tour, you know what I mean? You get on 5 or 6 different festivals in the EU, and then maybe even a few in the States, just to sort of spread that wealth, because I've heard about you for a number of years. I haven't followed you meticulously, not to say that I didn't enjoy your music. I enjoy your music very much. But it wasn't until recently when Push came about that I was like, I always dug that. And it was easy to dive into, but now I'm sort of hungry for it, and I'm curious, with the fan response and their critical response, what it would take. Do you self-manage, or do you actually have a team?
It's self-managed, really.
Okay. And that's hard.
The labels that we work with are fantastic. So Exhale and Mainstream for Push have been fantastic. Andres, he knows how a release should work and how to get it to sound good as well. In terms of making sure that on this release we didn't go into that world of lots of different coloured vinyl, because he was like, this needs to sound amazing. So it's going on like virgin black wax, which was cool. And he put together a fantastic PR team as well, which has given us that extra exposure. And with the previous releases, H42, we continue to work with them, because it's not like we sort of hop from one label to another. We maintain these relationships. So if we wanted to put out a re-recording of 2, with someone else, then H42 would be like, oh yeah, that's cool, we'll do it. I mean, they just put out our demo from 2004 on vinyl, and it's kind of like, just because they thought it would be a cool thing to do. And we really appreciate that relationship. Yeah. So it is self-managed, but it's kind of nurtured. But as it continues to grow, I think, particularly from the live environment, we'll definitely be looking as to how to do that, because I can't coordinate a lot of the live stuff. There's some quite unique skill sets, and I've got some friends, quite a few people I know that are in bands that tour a lot, or that are even tour managers that I could probably reach out to. So when we were growing up in the 2000s, it was us in sort of Swale, and then there was a band called Bosk who were in Kent as well, and they were kind of in that they did a lot of music, and they've gone on to do very well. They're phenomenal. They're on Death Wish. But Tom, who was a bass player similar to myself, he's now a tour manager. So if I was to do anything, I'd probably just sort of text him and be like, how are we going to make this work? And hopefully that would be cool.
Yeah. Oh man, I would love it. I mean, I would make my way over there. And in fact, I'll even throw my hat into the ring and say, if you ever need a drummer, I am more than happy to replace anybody. If I may, before I let you go, a question I like to ask artists like yourself is, what have you found over the last 20 years, in this business? It's not so much about telling, if you could tell your younger self, but what have you had to overcome? What was a surprise about the business that you weren't expecting?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. I think there was a lot of, probably it was the exposure to opportunities, which was great. When you're sort of a new band, then everything feels like an equal opportunity to pursue. Right. So a show that is going to be, that's not going to be great, feels like it has equal stature to maybe going up to London or something like that. And I think the biggest thing that we've had to overcome is probably having to rewrite material to the point whereby we feel like actually we're so enclosed and encapsulated within the music that we've not actually been able to get it out there and then move on. And we spent a lot of time on the first album bringing that together, which felt right, but then probably too much time between that and Continuum, and therefore that quite a lot of the build that was linked to that from towards the end of 2009, when I mentioned we were doing lots of shows in London and everything, we lost all of that. It sort of fell away because I was like, oh, vinyl, let's go and do a 7-inch series, let's go do all these little releases, which were cool, but kind of lost a lot of that. I'd probably say that mass, that critical mass, that momentum. So having got like Continuum, Buried Memories and Push Out now, I think maintaining that critical mass and that momentum is probably the thing that I've learned is important to keep doing, and to keep the records, thematically consistent, and that they work in their own context, but that they are still seen as SOAC records. Yeah. But to make sure there just isn't like a 5 or 10 year gap. I'm all for mystique and I'm all for being sort of withdrawn, but really, only Tool can get away with that. And, they are obviously a band which I look at and go, look, that's a great approach to do. But in order to build that approach takes a long, long time. And to be fair, that's, it's completely out of reach for us. So for us, it's almost to try and build something which has got the same integrity to us, but to keep it at a maintained level of communicating with people that are into the band. Otherwise, all this other new stuff swarms in, which is cool. But equally, it's kind of like, oh, Sons of are back, but I can't quite track their journey now because they're doing something else over here. And I just want to try and make sure it's a delicate balance again, which is kind of like a key theme of being in contact enough for it to be organic and natural and relevant without promoting and pushing loads of stuff on people, but being withdrawn enough to be, almost not, to be humble and maintain integrity and a bit of mysteriousness, and the people that are into the band will dig into it without it being, we feel like we're sort of sacrificing our own identity by feeling this need to promote everything and push everything and say, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. Yeah. So we'll almost go after this, we'll sort of go back into a huddle really and just try and figure out the next step, but it won't be like another 5 or 10 years, hopefully.
Yeah, I hope not either. I mean, no. Nick, I love your material. I mean, I truly love it, but what I've discovered today and having this experience with you, and you've used the word a few times here at the end, but I don't think you were pointing at yourself, but how I feel about this experience is, yes, you are an artist and you are a man of integrity, and you have taken this incredible amount of time to slow roll us in a sense, and to provide us with joy every once in a while. Just when we think we're not going to get any more SOAC, we get something new, and it's inspiring. And so I just want to say thank you, because this has been such a pleasure, and you're so eloquent and soft-spoken and kind and gracious. And
well, thank you very much for all of your interest and support. I mean, we don't really often have the platform, such as this through yourself to talk to you, and we really appreciate the interest and the support and the conversation as well, because it is as I say, it sort of comes back full circle. It is about having an organic conversation that feels right, and it feels like we could just have a chat next week and the week afterwards, and it's just and that's how it should be. And whenever we try and communicate with people, that's how we are with everybody in terms of that. So yeah, I really appreciate your candidness and openness there, Rob. Thanks very much for the support. We appreciate it.